Okay, people. So we're here for a little bit to talk about how to know our mind well, how to navigate this crazy mind of ours, how to sort it out, how to turn it into the mind of an amazing person. This is really what the Buddha's telling us, and it's quite a revelation because we don't think like this in our world. We think we have to change the outside world. We can do that, but he says best change your mind, then you can do what you like. So we think we're here together to do that. And so we can put ourselves together so we can help others, because we are all in the same boat. Everybody's crazy and wants to be happy. So we get ourselves together first, then we can help them. That's it. Think like that. That's our motivation. So there's so many ways of talking about how to be your own therapist, how to be your own therapist. Lovely, lovely words, Lama. And Lama actually said how to be your own psychologist. And I cheated when I edited one of his teachings, and I said therapist. So now it's stuck. But he actually said psychologist. Same. How to be your own psychologist. That really is, actually, that is the Buddhist approach. That's the thing, which doesn't mean you don't rely upon somebody. I mean, Buddha's, you can think you go to Buddha, he's your psychologist. You go to a therapist, or there's a person. So Buddha's the same. He's our psychologist. And this is not joking. People get very offended sometimes thinking it's either insulting psychology or it's insulting Buddhism, But I mean, it's just a Greek word for mind. We love to use Greek words, I don't know why. It makes it sound serious. And it's usually sort of lifts it up and gives it kind of it gives it status. And that's why I remember one comedian complaining about how the word pedophile, because it's Greek, it makes it sound up and important, but actually it's a really heavy duty thing, So strange how we make everything Greek. Isn't it fascinating? Psychologist, it's mind. Buddha's expertise is the mind, which is surprising because we don't think of spiritual as the mind. And that's a big difference. I think the thing in Buddhism, that's the word Buddha uses, the mind, He doesn't just mean the brain. He's not meaning the brain. He's meaning all the thoughts and feelings and emotions and unconscious and subconscious and instinct, intuition, this entire spectrum of our inner being. That is our mind. So the Buddhist approach is that we can develop it to astonishing degrees, way more radical, I would suggest, than we actually think possible in our psychological models and in neuroscience, because we're talking about the brain. Here, Buddha's talking about the actual subjective cognitive process itself. And so we also know the approach in our world, is we give enormous status, enormous power. We give great importance to the outside world, to the events and our mother and our father and the external world and the people in our lives and the genes and the DNA and the chemicals and the body. That's where we look first. The first thing we do is investigate. When we see a child who is angry, let's say, the first thing we think about is what their parents are like. I wonder what happened to them to make them angry. This is very deeply ingrained in us. I think that attitude I think we'd agree with that. The Buddhist approach, in some, it doesn't contradict. You can look at the external world, but the Buddhist approach is kind of incredibly direct. His approach to the mind is to look into the mind itself, into the thoughts themselves, into the anger itself, into the jealousy itself, into the love and kindness and all the different tendencies in the mind themselves. You go straight there. And I think it's not trying to be rude about us, but I think our very strong impulse is to point to something out there. This is why I'm depressed. This is why I'm jealous. But it's sort of the feeling is of getting ourselves off the hook because we feel guilty, or we feel like a bad person. We feel like we shouldn't be this way. Guilty, especially guilty. I think it's very instinctive in us, actually. And so we want to get off the hook. That's what happened to me. Therefore, I'm allowed to be angry. This is what happened to me. That's why I'm depressed. What we mean is it's not my fault. This is why and that indicates we feel guilty. Very, very, I think, totally fascinating, that attitude. It's very fascinating. So then as soon as we hear the Buddhist view, Yes, bad things happen, and yes, good things happen. But he is saying what's in the mind. It's very simple, but we hear it in a very heavy way. That what's in the mind is mine. Whoever punched you in the nose, still anger is there. So we assume, I think we assume if someone punches you, well, look, we say, well, of course I'm angry. Or even if you stub your toe, we say, well, of course I'm angry. As if there's no choice. I think all of these attitudes, would we agree that this is how we feel? This is why we really have to unpack all this, and look at this. So when we hear the Buddhist view that says your mind is the problem, and your mind is the source of your happiness, we hear it in a very kind of heavy way, like, oh, you mean it's my fault? Oh, I'm the blame, am I? That's how we hear it, because I think we've got all these instinctive views about guilt. We really got to look at that, Guilt is a very awful disservice to ourselves. Guilt is anger turned against yourself. Anger is you did this and you did this and you did this and you're a bad person. And guilt is I did this and I did that and I did this and I'm a bad person. And that's very heavy. We have that very strongly. It's so awful to have that. So the Buddhist approach is, to learn to know our mind, which means our thoughts and feelings and emotions, simply because we can learn to identify, very simple, forget the outside world. And that's hard for us, but forget the outside world. Forget whether your husband, left you or you stubbed your toe, in a way. You don't forget it, but the thing you focus on, okay, get the hell out of the way of the dumb husband. Doesn't mean you shouldn't leave a bad situation. Yes. But he's saying the mind is our mind, our thoughts and feelings and emotions are incredibly flexible. And he's saying, and we've got to look into this and see if it's true, that the anger itself, the depression itself, the jealousy itself, the anxiety itself is painful. And we can change it. That's all he is saying. But if we have the attitude that it's not my fault and it's his fault, and what do you mean I should change my anger? He should change. If we have that view, it's very hard to get past it, That's why using extreme examples is very powerful. So I always use this extreme example of this woman I knew who was in prison. She's out now. She was there 17 years in Florida on death row for having killed 2 policemen. She was innocent. Husband got executed. His head burst into flames. The parents died. She lost her children. Like one nightmare after another, like step by stubbing your toe. And she's not a Buddhist. She's not a Christian. She's not a Jew. She's Jewish, but she didn't have religion. But she had this astonishing intelligence, is all I can say. There she was in her own cell, year after year, this nightmare going on. And she said, finally, I realized I couldn't change anything. But they couldn't take my mind from me. I mean, you hear stories like that. You hear about people in Auschwitz. You hear people, always stories like this all over the world. And we're always astonished by people like this. But what the fascinating point is, we can see that those people are stable and sane and happy, even in Auschwitz, even on death row for 17 years in the cell on her own in a nightmare. That's the key. And all that's doing, Buddha happens to be saying he agrees with that approach. He didn't make up the mind. It's just his style, his approach. Because life's bad enough. Life is awful. Terrible things happen. And okay, he's got his own explanations for why. That's a whole other discussion. But all he's saying is, these people prove it, In other words, Sunny, this woman, she was able to see from herself sitting in a cell, on her own, in a cell, on her own, in isolation, 24 hours a day in a cell with a Bible. That's all they gave her. She was able to come to the conclusion, because she couldn't change anything else, she could change her mind. That's the miracle. And that's all Buddha's saying. But it's really, because I said before, it's really hard to hear, In other words, when we say, I'm allowed to be angry, that tells us everything. What do you mean I can change being angry? We say, I'm allowed to be angry. Look at what they did to me. That's how we talk. And it is true. It's shocking what happens to people in the world. But she had this astonishing, all I can call it is emotional intelligence to recognize that she could change her own mind, that her mind wasn't set in stone. In other words, she didn't have to be crazy, just full of despair and rage and go crazy and insanity and depression. So she worked on her mind. She worked on changing the way she experienced this life, you know. She learned yoga. She taught herself things like this. So to give it in her, I mean, she's a friend of mine. She's out of prison now. And I hope before we both die, because we're both old, I want to interview her about her approach, because it wasn't labeled anything. It was her own approach, you know. I'm fascinated. I have to ask her. I have to interview her about it. But she said something like, she said, for example, I would give myself permission to be raging angry for 5 minutes. And then she would stop and go back to her inner work, whatever she used to do. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that for me is the proof, absolute proof of the pudding. And especially because she's not religious. She's not just kind of spouting, oh, look, I'm a good Buddhist. She just found it herself. And that's why the Buddhist view isn't because he made it up. It's not a belief. It's just an incredible ability that if we can be brave enough to see. I mean, Buddhists argue about you can change the world. Change it, please, if you can. But what if you can't? That's always the point. And this really shows our despair in our lives, you know, because of these views we have. Somehow, and it's also instinctive. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. You know, bad things shouldn't happen. Only good things should happen. So we're in a lot of confusion. It seems to arise naturally, this view, you know, guilt. This is what's instinctive in us. I mean, when I was a little girl, my mother didn't have to teach me how to be angry. You know, I knew how. So then if it's true, we can, quote unquote, change our mind, which means the emotions, then we've really got to start to understand, because it doesn't make sense to us initially. Because what we experience when we say anger is what we call it is an emotion. The body's involved, it's intense, the feeling is horrible, the mind's out of, the thoughts are berserk. We think, what do you mean change it? How can I do that? It seems like you've got to suffocate it, you know? So in our lives, we can see this. We either vomit everything out or we completely suppress and deny. So we think we've got to suppress it. This is not what he's saying, not the Buddhist approach at all. That's why it's so important to understand this Buddhist approach, if you want to, you know, that the emotions are just the tip of the iceberg. When it's hit, when the body feels it. We only notice what's happening in our mind when the body feels it, when it's emotional. And then it seems impossible. What do you mean change it? It's impossible. Of course, at that point, it is impossible. People say, when I'm having a fight with my boyfriend, what can I do? Well, it's too late at that point. This is the whole thing. I always use this silly example, but it's a really good one. If you'd never heard of mechanics, you have a beautiful new car, and you drive it and drive it, you never pay attention to the wobbles of the wheels, you never pay attention to oil or petrol or anything. Well, okay, petrol, you run out of gas, but this is what you say you put gas in, but you never pay attention to anything else. And then one day at 100 miles an hour on the freeway, suddenly the wheel is falling off. And that's like exactly what you're saying. I'm in the middle of a fight. What do I do about my anger? You say, oh, my wheel's falling off. What do I do? We all know that's foolish. We all know if you pay attention to the wobbles of the wheel and you go to the mechanics regularly, you would never have a wheel fall off. Well, here, emotionally, it is exactly the same. We can learn to pay attention to what the hell is going on in our mind before it rises to the surface of intense emotion. That's all the Buddhist approach is saying. I mean, it goes to a very subtle degree. But even ordinary people like us, forget about getting single point of concentration, achieving nirvana, all this stuff. Forget that. Just to learn the discipline of doing some kind of discipline practice every morning, like watching the boring old breath, training your mind to stay on one thing, training yourself not just to be emotionally unconscious of what's happening in your head until it vomits out the mouth, training yourself every day. And then you bring that skill to bear off your cushion when you go down to the kitchen. Or simple example. Whereas once you would have blurted out to your kid, get angry with it, or blurt it out to your hubby because there he is slurping his coffee again. Forget about you being on death row, your husband's brain's bursting into flames. Start with the small things. Your husband's slurping his coffee. So when you bring the skill to bear from your cushion of paying attention, okay, on this cushion is to your breath, but it's a skill to step back and focus the mind. It's training. It's a practical skill. And then you bring it to bear when you're in the kitchen. And so instead of mindlessly, as you would have before, vomited out of your mouth the words to the kid and the hubby because you didn't pay attention, now you're able to pay attention and notice the angry thoughts, because all the emotions, so this is surprising to us, are rooted, underpinned by, coming from, in our mind, conceptual thoughts, the angry thoughts. How dare this? How dare he do this? She this, he this. You should not do that. I want this. All the emotional thoughts of attachment and aversion, subtle, underneath. That's when we can begin to change. You can't do much when the wheel's falling off at 100 miles an hour. It's just too late. That's the only time we notice what's happening in our lives. And then, of course, we sneak off guiltily to a therapist, to the mechanic. Bit late. This is the point. But you've got to have the wish to do this. And that takes a lot of humility. Instead of thinking, what do you mean I should change? It's my husband who should change. My kid who should change. Then it's a disaster. You can't do a thing if you think that. So it takes a lot of courage to even recognize that our mind plays a role. I mean, one time Lama Zopa said, and I was so shocked, you almost can't believe it, but you listen, it's true. The vast majority of all humans on the planet, it's too shocking, the vast majority of all humans on the planet, all the dumb ones, all the intelligent ones, all the intellectual ones, all the artistic ones, you think about it, all the good ones, all the bad ones, think about it, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Meaning we are all completely focused on the outside world. We are completely focused on the outside world. That's where happiness is, and that's where suffering is. So all our attention goes there. So he's right, because we don't even notice what's in the mind until it comes to the surface and vomits out, or until we get so depressed we can't get out of bed one morning because we haven't been paying attention. That's the thing. It's not, and don't hear it like religion, please. This is a practical way to live life, And Buddha didn't invent this. He's just good at it, that's all. It's expertise. But the first step is having the will to do it. And that takes a lot of humility, not the victim mind. What do you mean I should change? That's the big first step. Once you do that step, you're on the right way. You'll be fine. Are we communicating? It's such common sense, isn't it? But it's the hardest job we'll ever do because we're not used to it. We've got to practice. And so don't wait till you've been accused of murdering 2 policemen before you start doing it. In other words, deal with the hubby's coffee. Deal with your stubbing of the toe. Deal with the baby events. But we don't. Because when everything's going relatively nicely, we just don't pay attention. Like to the wheels wobbling, And I could say, if you really do this job, even forget nirvana, forget concentration, forget all the high levels of realizations. Just doing this every day, having a technique where you pay attention and train your mind to be focused, you use that skill in your daily life to pay attention to what is happening as much as you can, moment by moment, and that's the thing that's always surprising to us. And then you start to work on your thoughts. And that's the part that's hard for us to see, how anger comes down underneath, beyond the emotion, to being thoughts. It seems so surprising. Depression even is the same. But anxiety is the same. All these energetic feelings we have. And the body's feeling them, anger, low self-esteem, all of these unhappy states of mind. So even love and compassion are the same. They're rooted in being thoughts as well. And so in other words, a good example is, let's say you never learn music and you start to learn classical music and you learn all the theory. I mean, it's totally theoretical, isn't it? It's incredibly sophisticated theory, thoughts, all about A this and F this and A major and all this intelligent kind of thoughts. You learn and learn and learn. And in the beginning, it's really hard. And then you keep playing the piano, you're expressing it on the piano until eventually it's completely experiential, totally instinctive, beyond thoughts. We all know that. That's called practice. Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. We've practiced the theories of anger, the theories of attachment, the theories of anxiety, the theories of jealousy and low self-esteem. Buddha would say from countless lives, we come instinctively programmed with it from the first second of conception. So we've been really practicing in the past, which is how come I was instinctively angry as a little girl. Not, my mother didn't have to teach me. In exactly the same way, that little boy, I'll talk about it, I watch on YouTube, 6 years old Russian, playing Bach, you know. He'd practiced musical theory to the point in this life, it just pops out. He's practiced it. And I'd practiced anger enough, it just popped out and I practiced that. It's exactly the same. I'm not kidding. It really is. When something is instinctive, it just means you've done it that often. Now it's second nature. And of course, you've got to posit the possibility here, you know, because if you think you come from mummy and daddy, or you think you come from God, then it's a different scenario, you know. But the Buddha's saying you come from previous moments of yourself, which I think is a good explanation. So it's your anger, your anxiety, you're being good at music, you're being good at you know, killing. It's a habit you bring into your mind. And because you've done it that often, it's automatic. Same with the music, same with the anger. Really is the same, I promise. So that's kind of a revelation to understand that. That means now we're good at anger and jealousy and low self-esteem. We've got to unpack it. Sort of like you just, you know, you got to unpack it. Like the little 6-year-old, I'm sure he didn't know how to teach people the theories of music. He just knew how to play because he'd practiced it that often. So he probably had to learn the theory so he could express it to people. It's just the same here. We know how to be angry, so we've got to start to unpack it and then begin to hear what anger's saying. Kind of you know, you listen to the thoughts. So what is anger saying? This is the whole point. And so what are the main things that are underpinning all this? It's attachment and aversion. Buddha talks about like 84,000 neurotic states of mind. Very funny. And they all come down to being three. He calls them the three poisons. And kind of because we have this very different type of psychology, it always sounds kind of cute. But it's kind of amazing. These three main neurotic states of mind. And all the others are rooted in these three. There's a very particular kind of, it's almost like a map of the mind, you know? The neurotic sides, not to mention the good ones. We're looking at the rubbish ones. So the two main ones that play, the three are called ignorance, which is this really deeply instinctive, very hard to identify. We talked about it the weekend, you know, very hard to identify, primordial, ridiculous conceptual story, so subtle we can't even hear it, about a concrete, solid, self-pity, poor little bereft me. On the basis of this is the attachment to get what that me wants, and then aversion when it doesn't. So attachment and aversion, we run between these like 1 trillion times a day. They are there automatically. Attachment is the key one. So this is the one we have to understand, you know. And this is, again, surprising. We don't think like this. This is not the Jung's model and Freud's model. You don't get it from your mummy and daddy. You bring it with you. So attachment is multifaceted. So if you can say it's based on a concept, then what's the concept? What's attachment saying? Well, its energy is self-pity, and I don't mean to be mean. It's like, I haven't got enough. I am not enough. There's an aching feeling of not being, in other words, of deep dissatisfaction. Something's missing. It's an aching feeling of dissatisfaction. So then the proactive part of that is, I have to look for something, you know? So then so attachment is multifaceted. Actually, it's this feeling of not having enough, which you really want to give thoughts to it, is low self-esteem. I am not enough. And look at all of us. I don't think I've ever met a person on the planet who is satisfied, for example, with their body. Everybody on the planet finds fault when we see our body, isn't it? No, we're not satisfied. Never satisfied with it. All we notice is the faults. When you're old, all you notice is your wrinkles, isn't it? And your friend says, oh, you've got character, Robina. What? It's called wrinkles, you know? No, it's character. It's like a joke. We're not, in other words, we're not satisfied. So when it's really extreme, I'm not good enough, I don't do this, I can't do that, and we loathe ourselves. His Holiness, remember, the Dalai Lama said when he saw the extent of this in the West, he was quite shocked, you know, so sad. This level of, it's called self-hate. This is all a function of attachment, not being satisfied, not enough. never enough. And where all that comes from is the concept of attachment, which is always, its energy is emotional hunger. And then it dumps that emotional hunger onto the cake, the boyfriend, the handbag, the thing, whatever it might be, or just even more fundamental, getting only the nice things. Basically, primordial level attachment only wants the nice things, only wants everything to be lovely. It means only wants what I want. It's very self-centered in its nature. And then it exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake, the deliciousness of the handbag, the deliciousness of a boyfriend, or whatever the event or thing or person or action might be, you know. And it's totally instinctive because it's so practiced. It's far more subtle than that. So we're actually walking through life not satisfied. So always therefore wanting something more, because if you're not satisfied, you want something. You've got to fill up the gaping hole, isn't it? So always sort of instinctively looking for something. And that what it means is minute by minute throughout the day, you want things to go nicely. And the instinctive attachment thinks, well, when I get the nice coffee for the breakfast, then I'll feel better or feel happy. And then I get this, and then I get that, and I'll get this, and I'll be happy. And I go to work, and I'll drive in the car, and I'll do this, and I'll get that, and I'll be happy. All the time it's looking for this moment when you'll be satisfied. But the Buddha's saying, and it's hard to see, that this attachment by definition can't be satisfied. It's very hard to hear this. So what happens when you can't get what you want, which is 1,000 times a day, is aversion, upset, annoyed, irritated, frustrated. They're polite words for anger. We go between these 1,000 times a day. Then on top of that, we've got love and kindness and goodness, and we live our lives. I mean, they're our saving grace. We're looking at the ones that cause the problems. So aversion, which is the, you know, variations of it, the volatile level is anger, screaming and shouting. The milder levels, irritation, annoyed, frustrated, upset. We all know those. They're moments of attachment not getting what it wants. 1,000 times a day. The second you stub your toe, this is what's so shocking. You say, well, of course I'm angry. No. You only get upset because attachment had an assumption that you should have a happy toe. The hunger for happy feelings is so strong that then as soon as we don't get them, we get a shock, and it's called anger. In other words, a person who's quite developed, you know, in their own mind, whether from past life practice or this life, they learn to be content. So if you stub your toe, you feel the pain, but you don't get so emotionally upset. If things go wrong, you manage it. And this is what we're trying to get to. The red light comes, you don't have a mental breakdown. You recognize the red light, you can't change it. So you accept it. Not passivity. That's what we're trying to become. So we can navigate all the dramas of life, because we can't guarantee bad things won't happen. But the moment we go from pillar to post, from shock to, you know, fear and all the dramas. So all this is quite subtle because it's at the level of assumption in our mind. So, okay, again, conceptual story, that's the essence of the conceptual story of attachment, coming from I'm not enough. The more that is there, the more we dump an exaggerated story of deliciousness onto the thing we're pursuing, such that when we get it, I'll get happy. That's the process, you know. And then it leads to disappointment, because attachment exaggerates the role of the cake in making us happy. It exaggerates the role of, you know, the nice new dress or the boyfriend or the music or the event or the cake or whatever. So it's happening all the time. So it's anticipating something, getting it, and then disappointment. Anticipating, getting it, and disappointment. This is the process of aversion, attachment, and aversion. It's very subtle. So the conceptual story of attachment is, you know, from the energy of I'm not enough, I'm hungry, emotionally hungry, and then exaggerating the deliciousness and expectation. They're all the story, you know, expectations, projection, manipulating. You know, what are these words we use in the West? Control freak. That's attachment. Attachment wants to control everything to make it the way I want it. We can't handle anything that doesn't go the way we want. That's why we have a panic attack when it goes wrong. You know? I think we recognize. So how do you work with it? Well, when you do some practice every day and you start to hear, you start to identify these things happening inside you before it gets to the level of emotion. That's the key to success. And of course, this goes to incredibly subtle levels. Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You'll never begin to comprehend it until you start doing the work internally. You know? Every day you start to see it a bit more clearly, a bit more clearly, a bit more clearly. So then you can argue with it when you're more quiet. We all do that anyway. We all talk to ourselves. Like you're mad at your sister, you know, and you say, come on, Robina, don't you have to say anything. Give the girl a break. You talk yourself through. That's all that we're talking about here before it comes out the mouth. You solve the problem. That's what Sunny did in her cell. She literally worked through her intense, incredible emotional pain to come to her own way of accepting the reality of it, because she couldn't change it. And that does not mean passivity. The interesting was, because she didn't lose the plot, didn't go crazy in this nightmare, she kept her sanity and she continued to work on her freedom and got it out, and got it after 17 years. You know, because she could see she could, you know, you don't just sit there, be passive. Oh, well, I'll put up with it. I'm in prison, and sit back like an idiot. No. And then because she was able to deal with that intensity for those years, and then this is the word we use these days, isn't it? PTSD. I was watching recently on PBS one of those old documentaries about Vietnam War, I think. Yeah. So in the Vietnam War, they called it PTSD. But the Second World War, they called it something else, shell shock. The First World War, they called it something else. 2,000 years ago, there's always different names for it. Do you understand? When you have these traumas. So the latest one we have it as PTSD. Everybody on the planet says, I've got PTSD now. Well, of course you have. You know why? Because we didn't deal with it at the time. But Sunny doesn't have, I'm being serious now. I know the woman. If you meet this lady, she's 80-something in a wheelchair. She helps people who get out of prison. She's this little old lady. You would never, ever in a million years ever notice that she's got this intensity of suffering for years, because she didn't carry it with her. You see what I'm trying to say? PTSD is you haven't able, and we're not able to deal with the pain. You can imagine being in the Vietnam War. We're not equipped. We haven't taught. We haven't learned. And all these boys, they're all 19-year-old working class boys doing all the warring, you know. Of course, you don't know how to deal with it. So you put it away or go crazy. Well, Sunny didn't go crazy. And that's all I'm getting at here. We can learn to be sane in our lives by dealing with the stubbing of the toe at the moment. I'm not joking. Because what happens is, attachment just didn't get what it wanted. You get angry, and then you keep it in there. You keep it in there. You don't deal with it, and it builds up. That's when eventually you get PTSD. This undealt with dramas all our lives because we haven't been equipped. Are we communicating here? It's really sensible, but it's intense hard work. But it's possible. Those people in Auschwitz, you can see they didn't have PTSD. They somehow had an ability. I'm thinking of one person, I don't even know his name. Frankel or somebody wrote a book. Who was that man? Some guy who was in one of those, you know, places in the war. Who? What's his name? That's the one. I've heard about him. I haven't read him. I've heard about it. Because he had the ability, he found his inner tools to deal with it, you know. But the trouble is we tend to say, oh, you can't fix PTSD. You can't fix it. It's permanent forever. We often say that in the world. That's the modern view, because it's the brain, you know, but not the Buddha's view at all. The mind is infinitely flexible. So that's something to say. Now ask me some questions, please. Any questions you like? Yes, sweetheart.
Oh, there you go. You hear me on Zoom? Okay. My question is, when something out here happens and I have this ache, whether it's anger or more subtle at the moment, it's more subtle. Do I breathe with it? Do I do Tonglen? You know.
No, you see, that's the thing. What I'm talking, okay, that's where, if you were talking about how to play piano, you'd have to know what level of playing you're at. If you're a really sophisticated player at, you know, university level, you deal with that, you use those tools. But if you're junior school, you've got to know where you're at. Well, right there, you just said Tonglen. That's university level. And if you're capable, then honey child, apply it. But the first stuff's got to come first. We're dealing here with the first level of recognizing. If you can catch it, you say, even then when you said it, it was still just a feeling you're talking about, isn't it? You can't hear the thoughts. The thoughts aren't saying something. The thoughts are saying something, but we don't pay attention. And that was probably a while before, but you only notice when it comes to the physical feeling.
I have the thoughts in there.
Well, you have to hear the thoughts.
I do hear
and then you argue with them.
Okay, argue.
That's all. That's all.
Thank you.
So give an example, because we all recognize. Say some of the thoughts. We're all the same. Say some of the thoughts. This is the point now. What are the thoughts? Say the thoughts. Give a simple example of a scenario.
Boy, I didn't deserve that.
Okay, there you go. Right. Something mean to you, isn't it?
Yes.
There you go. This is, I tell you, we could do 1 hour of being our own therapist on that one. Let's unpack it from the classic Buddhist point of view. Should we do this? Let's unpack that simple response. It's got layers. Yes. So let's unpack it, all right? This is the classic Buddhist approach, including the view of karma. All right?
Yes.
So let's do it. So there's let's do it. Okay. First, if you don't have the view of karma, so Sunny doesn't have the view of karma. She never thought about it. She doesn't care about karma. So she wouldn't have applied that one about why is it happening to me, which is one of the deepest ways we suffer. So for her, so I've heard some people say to that one, okay, karma, I'm going to go to karma in a minute, but I'm using other people who don't have the view of karma. Often people say, well, why not me? That's what they say. So Sunny never thought about karma, never talked about God. She talked about the universe, what the universe brings or something. She talks in this way. So she doesn't have the view of karma, but the karmic one is a massive one if you're a Buddhist. Are you a Buddhist?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at it. So that's why I use the example, another example always, of those young Tibetan nuns. Richard Gere in 2003 invited a bunch of ex-prisoners, to come and meet the Dalai Lama and have a big meeting, about 20 former prisoners, all of whom had done some kind of meditation in prison. And people like me were invited who worked with people in prison. It was a very moving day, They all talked about the suffering of the racism and the politics and the dramas and the horribleness of prisons. And then they met His Holiness. It was a wonderful time. But he also invited 2 young Tibetan nuns. So this is the way to look at the karmic one, which is massive for a Buddhist, And this is the starting point. Okay, so these young women, you've got to remember that Tibet was, since the 7th century, it's been Buddhist, and they take their philosophy seriously. They even learn it. They don't just go, oh, yeah, I believe in God and cross your fingers, They have real confidence in this view, which is in the bones of their being. Just like for us, what's in the bones of our being is that I didn't ask to get born and mummy and daddy made me and I got plonked on this planet, and why do bad things happen to me? It's very deep for us, isn't it? And that's the view that we take as a given. There's no other view involved. There's Christian view and Jewish view, but the real one is mummy and daddy made us. It's very strong for us. Would you agree with that? That's inbuilt, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the automatic response to that is I didn't ask to get born, therefore why do bad things happen? And it's very valid if it's true mummy and daddy actually did make you and there is no you before. You see what I'm getting at? Yeah. Then it really is true that you'd respond with shock and horror when a person out of the blue, for nothing you did to deserve it. It's really true. This is why we suffer so shockingly in our culture. Because that's instinctive for us. Well, for those young women, since the 7th century, the view that's in the bones of their being, automatically, it's been in India for 3,000 years, is their consciousness is not physical. It doesn't come from a creator. It doesn't come from mummy and daddy. It comes from the past. And it's countless lives, and everything you think and do and say has programmed your mind, and you come into this life, and all the good things that happen, and all the bad things that happen, and all your mind, and all your good, and all your bad, they're your habits from the past. That's in the bones of their being. You see what I'm saying now? It's such a hugely different view, you can't even believe it. And it's completely instinctive for them. And they've been brought up with this, they buy into this, they live according to this. And so, of course, and this is the point that sounds so shocking. There they were, telling their story. They were imprisoned, tortured, and sexually abused. I don't know for how long. They were young women, young nuns. And they were telling the story. I remember this. And what was really vivid was they didn't express what we call as anger or kind of tortured, They weren't tortured by it, which is how we are, because we have no explanation. You see my point? They have this explanation, which they work with. So therefore, they never actually say the thought. This is the shocking part. Why did that happen to me? They don't have that thought. This is so shocking. Another friend of mine, a Tibetan, who in 87, there was a big mini uprising, since 59. And the first mini uprising in 87, he participated, like a lot of the monks and the nuns were the radicals. Now, there they are with a view of karma, but they don't sit there like idiots saying, oh, well, harm us, it's all our fault. They're very good political activists. So they're out there demonstrating. And he said, first of all, his friend, he was demonstrating, got arrested, got released, got demonstrated again. His head had his friend blown off. His father died, brother was killed, and he decided he better leave, so he escaped to Nepal. And I said to him casually, Tigdron, do you ever get angry? And he laughed. He laughed. The way he said it was so shocking for us. He said, angry? What for? It's our own fault. He means simply karma, just so natural for them. So these young women, because you have the view that you came into this life with your own stuff, and you brought up with this at your tiny, and you're working with it, and when bad things happen, you learn to understand why it's happening. So then you learn to purify, you learn not to get angry, you don't become passive, but they couldn't do much, they couldn't escape. And so they struggled with it. It was part of their practice, dealing with this suffering, dealing with the torture, being sexually abused, trying to work with their minds, trying to have, and as they said at the end, what tears, one of them said, of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we know we must have harmed them in the past. But that's kind of intense, And that comes from this viewpoint. You understand? So even if you have the Christian view, this is another whole philosophical view. I remember we did a conference in San Francisco 20 years ago about happiness. And one of the little pieces was two parents whose children had been murdered. One happened to be white, one happened to be black. One of them was a friend of mine who worked with young kids in prison, Andre. And Andre's son had been stabbed to death in a bar. And the other woman, she became a Christian. And her daughter had been raped and murdered, right? So she wanted to meet the boy, and she did eventually, to meet the boy who killed her daughter, and she was so happy to meet him, and he was so happy because he could ask for forgiveness, whatever. But the point is, she became completely devoted to God. So that was her method for dealing with it and loving the murderer and having compassion, forgiving him because he belongs to God too. So everything's just viewpoint. If you really analyze it, it's all just viewpoint. We call it beliefs, but it's viewpoint. So people in the West say, oh, I don't believe in anything. That's hilariously funny. We've got the most rigid beliefs in the world. I believe my brain is a mind. I believe there's no reason for bad things to happen. I believe my mother made me. Do you understand? They're all beliefs. They're all viewpoints, put it that way. So the Buddha's viewpoint, if you're trying to work with it, when you hear the thought, which is the instinct one of anger and the hurt, and it's real hurt, I don't deserve that. How dare that happen to me? You argue with it. Well, honey, I've got, like those young women, probably struggled every day in their practice, trying to own it. But the other thing too that we forget, we also own the good things. You've got to also own the good things. We never do. We never say, why do good things happen? We don't care. Just give me more, So we've really got to use karma, this view that you come into this life, program with your own tendencies, program with your own seeds that will bring the experiences you have. So it brings this huge, if you practice with it, huge, this is before you look at the mind even. We're not even looking at what attachment is yet. We're arguing with the instinct of it's not fair. So you use this view to help you explain why things are happening, and you argue with it. Well, I must have created the cause in the past. And then when the good things happen, you delight. You don't just accept it greedily. I must have created the cause to have that happiness. How amazing. So you're using the karmic view to interpret. So all this, even before you even begin to look at attachment and aversion, this is massive. And most of us as Buddhists don't want to do this one, You understand? That's already tremendous. So those young women were such an example. And of course, we had compassion for our torturers. That's pretty intense. They must have done a lot of meditating while they're in prison those years, to come to that. So that's just karma. That's the first one. Next one is you hear then, this is how dare that happen to me, or it shouldn't happen, it's a mistaken view. It shouldn't happen, meaning you didn't cause it. Well, you did. But if you have the happiness as well, you did cause the happiness too. So it's good to have both, because otherwise we get a bit like victimized. You can hear it wrongly. You understand? So every time good things happen, you should be delighted that you must have created the cause. And so you are so happy. And then, of course, you want to keep doing that. That's why I love the view of of seeds and fruits. Buddha uses that all the time. So if I think about your garden, I use this example. You know it's your garden, right? You know you grew it. Every vegetable you see, every flower you see, every herb, every weed you see, you forgot to pull out the weed and you did grow the veggies. So the view is very kind of ownership. So your life is your garden. And whatever you have in your life, honey, good and bad, you planted them. So it's a pretty powerful view. And that alone completely can change everything. And then now let's go more deep and look into the thought process of attachment. So built into that, I don't deserve it, or why did that happen to me, is the assumption of attachment, which is that only good things should happen. We tend to think, I only deserve good things. And then we think, and I don't deserve bad. There's a very powerful feeling there. But it's like, you don't look in your garden and say, who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. You just don't say that. You understand? As if someone else did it to you, which is so passive. But this one of ownership is so powerful. So attachment is like this sense of entitlement. It's emotional hunger. And all this is the cause of our suffering. It's not to be guilty. So attachment is this feeling I haven't got enough. And then you're expecting, whatever this person was, you're expecting only the good things. So attachment gets a shock when it doesn't get the nice thing. And that's what aversion is. Aversion is the shock when your attachment didn't get what it wanted, which is the nice things. Attachment only can cope with nice things. Nice sound, nice smell, nice weather, nice food, nice feelings, and it's always wanting them anxiously. And the millisecond you stub your toe, the millisecond the person says the mean word, this panic attack of attachment not getting what it wants. So you argue with that one. It's more subtle in a way. Do you understand? And aversion is just mild anger. And all this is real. This is why we suffer. It's not to beat ourselves up. Are you hearing me? So you argue with them. You argue. So the stubbing the toe, the big one also to realize, this is huge as well. There's another one, but it's really obvious. This is scientific. There's a physical feeling called pain, fact. And then we assume, no choice, I must be angry. But what that is attachment only wants non-pain. And then aversion is, so the physical pain is one thing, but the thought of anger, how dare that happen to me, is another thing. And that's the part we can change. I mean, even I think in pain management, people talk about this. Or in the medical world, learning to deal with pain, you change your thoughts about it. Do you see what I'm saying? That's another approach. Do you understand? You've got to catch it. And of course, life is suffering. Terrible things do happen. And because we have this view of being innocent victims, we can't help but mistake this attitude as if it's guilt and blame, you know. That part we have to get past. Do you understand? Yeah, that's really good. What else, people? Yes, Scarlett.
Hello. Venerable, I've been wanting to ask this question. So I've been trying to work through, like, I wish there was a book that sort of gave you all the tools for when these emotions come up, like when there is anger, this is what you do. I'm curious your point of view, like when jealousy arises, like I recognize that that's in me. I get jealous, but I'm not sure how to skillfully deal with it.
I understand, darling. So tell me what you think jealousy is saying. Give it words.
It's saying the same, it's kind of saying the same thing you've been talking about, like why not me? Right? Like
you mean is jealousy in relation to a person?
I suppose, like, yes.
A person that you want to like you, but they like other people instead. Is that the jealousy you're talking about?
No, like, for example, I'm thinking about, I have a friend who is going to be separated and is going to be a millionaire. And I think, can you hear me?
I am a bit deaf and I'm just stupid because I don't wear my ear things. So I can't quite hear the words. It sort of echoes in the room. So I get you so far. So tell me what jealousy is saying, Scarlett. Say it clearly.
So, like, I have a friend who is a millionaire. And I think, what have I done in my past, thinking about how just life has progressed, that I'm not in a situation where I could be like her. Although I feel like in this life, I'm quite a generous
So
person.
hang on. Okay, stop. Just say to me what she said.
She has a friend who's a millionaire.
Oh, okay.
And
Oh, okay. So you're jealous of
jealous
me. Okay, okay, good, darling. Good, darling. This is a very good example, darling. A very good. This is a very common experience. Why poor people get jealous of rich people? It's not fair, and then we get resentful, and then we kind of get angry about them. Would you agree? This is how we feel, isn't it? You're saying that, yeah?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, darling. So listen. Okay. First of all, just because I'm asking, I don't say you have to have it. But are you a Buddhist? Do you have the view of karma, or is that a brand new idea to you?
No, I have that view, and I've been thinking
Okay,
about
good,
this.
good. So stop there. One approach to it is this. It's a bit again, just like the garden analogy. It's a really good one, Scarlett. Let's say you have a garden and you're growing things in it. And let's say your friend has a garden that's magnificent and so many vegetables and so many herbs. So you know you could get jealous, but then you come back to basics and you think, well, you could say, okay, look, that shows how hard she must have worked. She must be doing it longer than me. She's really worked hard. So I'm really happy for her. And you know what? If I want a good garden like that, I'm going to do it as well. And you get it as a learning. So from the point of view of karma, a person who's rich is past generosity. So then you think, well, I'm going to learn from that. And I'd like to be rich too. So I'm going to become generous. So you take it as a learning and then you rejoice for the other person because they created the cause. Are we communicating?
Yes. Yes.
Good, darling. There's always an approach. And the thing is, all of Buddha's teaching, where do you think I got all this stuff from? From reading Buddha's teachings. But the trouble is sometimes it's a bit sort of 2,500 years old and a different culture. So we've got to put it into our own words, you know? You understand, darling? She does. So now there's...
Yes. Yes, I
Good,
understand.
sweetheart. Christine, hello, darling. Happy to see you.
Thank you, Venerable.
Good.
So I can sit with compassion for others that may not have the same. Yeah. How do you no, let me try again. How do you deal with resentment?
Okay, darling, I understand. So is resentment similar to what Scarlett just said, kind of a bit like a jealousy because someone's richer?
No, I can sit with compassion for the other person, and the resentment comes from the inaction of the other person.
So a person's been mean to you and you're resentful. Is that what you're saying? No?
Yes. And I can have compassion for me, I can have compassion for them, but I'm now being put into a situation to have direct interaction. And I'm feeling like that's not a wise choice because I still do have these feelings of resentment and I don't know how to
I understand, darling. This is why, as I said before, we've got to sort of know where we're at. So compassion is a really more advanced one. But the first step has to be to deal with that hurt and that resentment. So this person hurt you, did they? Is that right?
That's fair, yes.
Okay, good. So then this is where you have to, first, if the karmic one makes sense, you understand the cause is that. But also the one is just to try and, you see, also anger, resentment it is how dare they do that to me, and then it is that I don't deserve it. So if we don't have the view of karma, you could use that view to help you know why it happened and understand it, and that heals a little bit. But also the one of just, I think also we have a very strong, one of our biggest attachments, Christine, and we've all talked about this a lot, is the craving that a person like us. So as soon as a person shows meanness, then that attachment doesn't get what it wants. So then the argument we can have with ourselves is, well, just because a person is unkind to me, That doesn't say who I really am. I am who I am, and I need to be content with it. So, like our mothers would tell us, you know, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words can never hurt you. Meaning, you are who you are. I'm fine on my own. I don't need this person to be all the time approving of me, because that's why we get hurt. I'm my own person. I am content in myself, and that person, they must be upset, so leave them alone. I'm not who they think. That's a very powerful one. Because we're all so hungry for people to be nice to us, you know. And this is the attachment to approval. It's our deepest, deepest attachment. And the worst pain when people are mean to us and don't love us or reject us. It can make us completely crazy. We have to see that we don't need to be reaffirmed by other people. And that's the point. As we grow spiritually and become more fulfilled in ourselves, other people's words don't harm us as much, and then it's easy to have compassion for them. But first we have to do the inner part, the inner work of seeing it's coming from this emotional hunger to be seen and heard and approved of. Do you understand, Christine?
I do, Venerable. Thank you. So I'm being asked to participate in a 70th birthday party for this person.
Oh, okay. Is this person in the family? Is it a close person?
Father-in-law. And
okay, now I understand. So that's a very different scenario. You've got certain responsibilities, haven't you?
And so I feel like the best I could do would be to go and just keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, keep your mouth shut, Christine. That's a very good policy, baby. Keep your mouth completely sealed and only say nice words and eat your pride and be nice to this bloke. I swear to you, darling, because it's your father-in-law, for everybody's sake. It's a big fat practice. All right?
Thank you, Venerable.
Do it. But zip the lip. That's the key to success. What else, people?
Venerable, I have
Yes,
a
go on.
follow-up with Christine.
Yes.
So I don't really want the approval from this person.
You don't what?
I don't want.
I know, but we do. Desperate from every being in the universe, we want it. Even the stranger on the road, and they toot their horn.
Really?
Why do you think we get upset? Because they don't approve of us. Come on, honey. It's way more subtle than we think. Way more subtle.
I would be very thankful if that person would just ignore me and not.
Well, that's if you have because you have a
Not
version.
be-
You have a version
I do
for them.
have a version. Yes.
Okay, so that's another whole discussion. Is it an X?
No,
Okay.
no.
Well, that's a version. You wish they just leave you alone. I know. I understand. Well, that's a version. So that's a predominant one there. Aversion because your attachment isn't getting what it wants. So your attachment isn't, in that case, is just okay, if a person's annoying you, you wish they'd leave you alone. So you're attached to your own comfort.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Attached to your own little spot.
I don't like being vomited on.
No, I understand. That's very reasonable. We don't want to be vomited on, do we? I understand that. This is, life is tough. This ordinary life is bad enough. Forget about being on death row. This is tough. Ordinary life is bad enough. Stubbing your toes bad enough.
Yeah.
God.
Stub my toes.
No. Wow. Okay, what else, people? Things, something to say? Nothing in there. Nothing in the chat box. There's 4 little things in the chat box, it says. Oh, I see. Okay, so nothing else to say? So what else can we talk about? And all this just takes time, I'm not saying I know much, but because this is the thing for me, I feel so fortunate because Lama Zopa back in 1987. He told me to so-called teach. I got such a shock, I mean, I've been studying for about 10 years and editing books. I learned a bit. But he said I should go out and teach. I was so shocked. Actually, it's very funny. It was in New Zealand after a retreat. And I'd known Lama Zopa for 10 years, actually, but I didn't know he was my Lama. Actually, I did know. I had a dream in my first retreat. After I became a nun, I did a Vajrasattva retreat in Dharamsala. I knew Lama Yeshe was my teacher when I first met them. 18 months before that, I'd come committed to Lama Yeshe. And Lama Zopa was teaching as well. I knew he was holy, but he was sort of behind Lama Yeshe. I couldn't, and I sort of knew, but I didn't connect with him, But then I had this vivid dream about a year later, after I first met him, about a year later, 18 months later, when I became a nun. Now I'm going to forget the beginning of the story, but never mind. I had this vivid dream. Excuse me. I was in Nalanda Monastery ruins, this amazing place near Rajgir where Buddha taught. I hadn't been there before, but I didn't only recognize it later a few years later when I went there. And it was this amazing ruins of this monastic university, incredible, Nalanda. All a group of the students were there. Lama Zopa was teaching, and I was in the group, and he told me to go out there, go to him. And he put his robe over one of my shoulders and his text over the other, and he said to follow him out. So I thought it was a nice dream, and I told a friend of mine, a Lama in Dharamsala. He said, oh, that's the Lama who will lead you to enlightenment, he said. I was very surprised because I thought Lama Yeshe was my Lama, you know. And I know you can have more than one. So I knew he was my teacher. I had a economic connection with him as a guru, my teacher. But it took me 10 years to recognize him. That was 10 years later. 10 years later in New Zealand after a retreat. When he told me to come upstairs and see him. And how I remember it. Because until then, because my mind wasn't ready, so he just chatted to me all those years over the period. Because I didn't see him as my teacher, so he never treated me like his disciple, always just cracked jokes and say hello and how are you, you know. But then finally, after 10 years, the penny dropped. And I went up to his room, and this is how I remember it vividly. Because I'd finished working for Wisdom Publications that I'd been doing for 10 years. I didn't have a job. So he said, I always think of Michelangelo, that painting of God, you know, big painting of God, pointing, that one. I was remembered as that, him pointing and saying, go to Sydney and teach. That's how I remember it. It wasn't like that, of course, you know. And I'm just saying that's when he taught me to teach. So they didn't need a teacher, but I had to go to the centre in Sydney. But it was very funny. This is incidental. I was nervous. I'd done some study. I'd studied the basic, a couple of years of the Lama Yeshe called the Geshe program. I've studied a few texts, done some editing. You learn when you edit. And I was nervous. I didn't know what to talk about, you know. And I worried first that I would run out of words. And then I thought, well, if I run out of words, I'll just say questions. And that's exactly what I do. When I've stopped talking, I'll say questions. That's fine. Well, the other one was, I thought, no reason to be nervous. I decided that when I teach, it's just like talking to one person. You don't get nervous talking to one person, isn't it? So I thought I'd just having a conversation. So then it worked. Anyway, just joking now. So why I'm telling you that is because he told me back then to teach, 1987. I studied low rig, you know, when I did the Geshe program. What I'm getting at is, when I studied it, it was very intellectual, with different concepts and this and that, and the epistemological model of the mind, the psychological model, this and this division, that division. It's very intellectual. You squeeze your brain. It's like learning musical theory. It's all theory, you know. But then over the years, because I knew the words, and then because you have to speak about it, the penny starts to drop. So I always say I'm so grateful that I have to talk about this, because this is my analytical meditation, speaking it out loud. You know, so every time I say it, a bit more clarity comes to me. So I always have to thank people for coming. So I look silly talking to myself, but no. Do you understand? So, and I don't know that much, but because I have to talk about it, when you're talking, you unpack it, you know. And it's based on the word. So I couldn't be saying any of this if I hadn't studied low rig. That's the thing. If I hadn't studied low rig, this bare bones text. Have you studied it here yet? Who taught it? Who? Oh, he did he? Many people studied it? Good, it's important. And you should do it again and again. Because that's the basis. That's the nuts and bolts, you know. What? The text. You mean the text? Low rig. Mind and aware, or mind. It's like the theories of the mind, the way it works, the different, like the sensory consciousness, mental consciousness. Then you've got the psychological model, you've got the delusions, you've got the virtues, you've got the others, and all these nuts and bolts. It's really delicious. Actually, there's really good books that are published on it that are very readable for us who haven't studied. So one of them is Geshe Tashi, who was in London for years. It's called just simply Buddhist Psychology, published by Wisdom, and he taught it to Westerners, and he sort of adjusted it in a very modern way. It's very, sometimes quite intellectual, but it's really fascinating. And that's the absolute basis, you know. Anything I'm saying here, I swear I could not be saying it if I hadn't studied that text like 40 years ago. Do you understand? And it's called Low Rig, that's the one, but Geshe Tashi's book is really good. Buddhist Psychology. We've had it, you've read it, you've looked at it? It's so helpful. Because he's taught it to Westerners and he speaks English, so it's very helpful. It's very good to study it. Buddhist psychology is great, Sylvia. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just saying, it takes time, you know. I know when I first saw all these, I didn't know what to say. When I first, I didn't, you have to just keep going. It's like practicing anything. And this is what I loved about Lama Yeshe, you know. All he ever did was teach like this. All he ever did was teach down-to-earth way about knowing your mind, you know. He hardly mentioned the word karma. He never mentioned the word hell realms, I promise you. He'd crack a joke, you know. Left that to Lama Zopa. So all Lama did was constantly try to get us Westerners to look into our minds and see our potential. And that's really all Buddha's saying, you know. It's incredible.
There's a couple of questions online.
Good one. What are they? Yes, sweethearts. There's Joey and there's Melissa. You talk to me, Melissa, first, sweetheart. You talk. Melissa, darling.
Okay. Oh, hi, Venerable.
Hi,
Thank you
Robina.
so much.
Venerable. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, go, Melissa. Yeah, let Melissa talk first, Joey. Then you, sweetheart. Go, Melissa. Melissa.
Okay. Hi, Venerable. Thank you so much for your teaching. It's nice to hear that you get nervous, or that you got nervous once with your teacher. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sweetheart.
The question I had was, well, two, Geshe Tashi and Buddhist psychology. Is that what you said?
Wisdom publications. Yep.
Okay, great. I'm going to look that up. I guess what I wanted to ask was the attachment around grief. So I understand the basics of attachment and aversion. And so I have this grief and guilt, and I know guilt is useless.
You mean grief and guilt? Why do you put the two together?
Because
okay, go on, sweetheart, talk.
The grief I have is because I took care of my mom her last year. She had dementia, and I could have, I spoke with you once about it, and I had these angry thoughts that came up, and 9 times out of 10, or 8 times out of 10, if I'm being real, I could bite my tongue. I could, remember this practice and watch my mind. And, but the other 2 times I couldn't.
So you got guilt because you got angry with your mother before she died, right? Did she die, darling? Did you?
Yeah,
is your mummy dead?
Yes.
Okay. So you have grief, meaning what? So how do you? So tell me about the grief, and then tell me about the guilt. What's the grief?
Well, I think
how would
grief
you define
is,
grief?
Yeah, how I define grief with my mom is that she's my mother. She's not here, so I'm experiencing the loss of her not being here in my life. So that's the grief. It's normal.
Okay, and that's a natural. Okay, so let's first talk about grief, sweetheart.
Okay.
I've got a feeling in the Buddhist psychological model, when you study this low rig, they list different negative states of mind, positive states of mind, neutral states of mind, different levels. It's all very precise, and they give a definition of each. And I feel there's not one that they call grief. It's a very unique phrase we use. So if we take the Buddhist model of seeing, 1, we've got some neurotic, deluded states of mind, and 2, we have the virtuous, positive states of mind, and they're 2 key separate characteristics. We mix them all up in a big soup. So my sense is grief is a mixture, 1, of compassion for your mother, a simple karmic connection, and there's a sadness that she's not there because you remember her good qualities, and then also because there's attachment there. So when the attachment, which is this emotional hunger, is very strong, that can completely overwhelm the grief, and many people never heal from it. You understand? So that's naturally is attachment. So remember the Dalai Lama when his mummy died. Sometimes he would mention her and tears would come. But it wouldn't, you could see it wasn't coming from some aching part of himself, like as if it wasn't coming from attachment. He was remembering her incredible qualities and her kindness and the sadness that she simply wasn't there. And then a minute later, he was cracking jokes again. So it hadn't eaten his heart out, which is what attachment does, So you've got to see, so it's not a natural process. But the more you understand impermanence, see, when some people, because there's so much attachment to a person, when they die, it destroys them, because you never think about impermanence. And because you've got this strong connection, of course, it's natural. I mean, one of my darling sisters, her husband of 50 years, and they've got 27 grandchildren, 7 children, great-grandchildren. She said it was the greatest pain of her life when he died. And that's inevitable,
Yeah.
So then you got to do the different analysis, the impermanence part, the karma part, think of his mind in the future. I mean, your mummy, so you think you do prayer, you use this energy to do prayers for your mother, if you have the Buddhist view. I mean, my sister doesn't. So there's a whole different bunch of approaches. Now, the guilt He's just neurotic. We've all got it.
Mhm.
So it's because you weren't perfect, because you did bad things to your mum. But, you just have to do the guilt. As His Holiness said, when you do the purification practice, these 4 opponent powers,
Yep.
the first one is you regret. We
Mhm.
hear that as guilt. So he said, when person asks him, what's the difference between guilt and this wholesome attitude of regret? And it's a crucial one, Melissa. It's based on karma. So when we have the view of guilt, it is, as His Holiness said, well, I did this and I did that and I did this. And then you conclude, and I'm a bad person. And so you just get all caught up and miserable. It's useless. It's not
Right.
active. There's nothing you can do about it. But he
Yeah.
said, regret, the first step's the same. I did do that. I did badmouth my mother. I was unkind to my mother. You own it. But then you say, what can I do to fix it? So that's
Right.
proactive. And that's the first step in the purification practice. But the
Right.
crucial piece is this. Regret is for your sake, because every time you were mean to your mum or kicked the dog or murdered somebody or whatever you've done, you
Yep.
sowed negative seeds in your mind. And because you know that you don't want future suffering, regretting having sowed those seeds is because you know what? I don't want future suffering. It's for your own sake, Melissa. It's like you regret smoking cigarettes because you don't want cancer. That's like compassion for yourself. So regret's very wholesome. And then you think, well, whom can I
Mhm.
turn to? You take refuge in the Buddha. And then the second part is now you have compassion for
Yeah.
those you are. And then you do the purification and then you vow to change. It's very productive. Do you
Okay.
understand?
I do. Yeah.
That's it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. Dearest Holly, darling, I haven't finished the teaching. I'm so sorry. So I'll call you back very soon, sweetheart. My friend in Kathmandu. See you, darling. I told her to ring me at 8. I forgot. I'm still here. It's the end of the teaching, isn't it? I'm a bit late, aren't I? Oh, I'm sorry to keep you. Maybe it's time to finish. So there's 2 more questions, though. So we have Joey and we have Lorraine. Go on, Joey, sweetheart. Also, she didn't hear me probably because I had my thing off.
Gotcha.
Hang on a second. I've got to send her a message.
Mhm.
Please wait. Wait.
Mhm.
Oh, she did. No, she didn't. Okay, where are we? Sorry. Okay, Joey, talk to me, sweetheart.
Hello, Venerable. So I have spent 53 years
I beg your
thinking
pardon.
that
What are you
I
saying?
have, can you hear me better now?
Go on, yeah.
Okay. I have spent 53 years thinking that I'm going to live one life and then go to heaven.
Okay, so good. So go on then. Question.
So my question is, I'm learning differently by studying with you and loving what I'm learning. So my question is, will my how it is shocking and even scary, will that subside? Will that get better the more I
I'm
continue
not
to
understanding this.
study?
I can't quite hear the last part, Joey. So what's the question, darling? Tell me about it. Say the question.
Will my so many feelings and emotions, learning that isn't what's going to happen, will that, like the fear that when I feel fear, will that lessen the more I continue to
Darling,
study?
listen, all
And
you can do, listen. So first of all, you had a view before. Now you're hearing the Buddhist teachings. So don't just be emotional about it. Listen to it, think about it, analyze it, read the teachings, and think about it very slowly and steadily and internalize it. And if you keep working with it, and you choose every time to buy into these views, but be very reasonable and sensible and take it one step at a time, Joey. That's all, darling. That's the main one. Don't leap
Okay.
into any emotional conclusions or anything. Be very
Okay.
clear and steady with yourself, okay?
Okay. So
Right.
no reason to be overwhelmed. No reason for that.
No reason for what?
No reason to let my mind feel overwhelmed. Like
I mean,
no reason
you
for
get
that.
overwhelmed, but try to keep steady. It's up to you.
Okay.
Take it at your own
Okay.
pace, Joey. Don't get so,
Okay.
just one step at a
Okay.
time, sweetheart.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Lorraine, and then we can go. We can finish. Yes,
Thank
Lorraine.
you.
Good, darling. Lorraine, talk to me.
Venerable. I have kind of the opposite problem as of the usual thing. After 30 years of horrible jobs doing janitor work and telemarketing and all kinds of other horrible things, I've just landed an amazingly good job that's it's good work. They have free food, they have a gym, it pays well. I can actually see hope for my future.
Well,
But
I'm
I
delighted for you. So what's the question, Lorraine? That's amazing. I'm so
question
happy.
is I'm so used to being uncomfortable that now being comfortable has become uncomfortable. I'm so
So
used to
what's the question, sweetheart? What do you
all
think is the
right, so
question,
I'm
Lorraine?
terrified. I'm terrified of what's going to happen next. What am I going to do? I just feel like something's
Well,
going to
then,
come
Lorraine, so you
down.
just have to be just like Joey said, with a different with Joey, but different. Sweetheart, I mean, you just got to be delighted when good things happen. Please enjoy them and be happy and be kind in return, and know that yes, life changes. But don't sit there paranoid, waiting for something to go bad. That's just so ridiculous. But try and enjoy it here, honey, and know you created the cause to get a good job. How marvelous! Rejoice in your virtue and do it well, and be delighted and enjoy it, please, Lorraine. How about that?
I'll do my best.
You do your best. Well done. Good,
Thank
darling.
you.
We will all do our best. So better go. I'm so sorry holding you waiting here. So we just think anything that's been useful in this hour and a half, 2 hours. Seeds have been planted, so we take what works for us, we try to apply it, and we just keep moving, turning this person into a marvelous person, one step at a time, for our sake and the sake of others. Jangtub Semtrog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Guchig, Ke Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang, Gong Ne Gondu Pa Ba Shog. And now can we have that swift return prayer that His Holiness wrote, please? We just say it together. So auspicious. There it is. So peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Ravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Lozang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make this request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. Such a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. That's it, people. Darling one, thank you so much. Thank you on Zoom. See
Thank
you all
you.
again. Thank you,
Thank you,
people.
Venerable.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Venerable.
Venerable.